President Trump, he's been blaming Democrats for the crisis that, as Andrew just laid out, he has directly caused, and his administration's policy of separating kids from their families is subject 1, 2, and 3 on every nightly newscast in the country. Now, he has a new boogeyman, which is really the old boogeyman. Take a listen.
Child smugglers exploit the loopholes, and they gain illegal entry into the United States, putting countless children in danger on the perilous trek to the United States. They come up through Mexico. Mexico does nothing for us. You hear it here. They do nothing for us. They could stop it.
It's the same guys who didn't build us that wall, apparently they were supposed to. Now, this situation could cause some serious political problems for the president and his party. Here is the Wall Street Journal's editorial board chiming in. Nobody's calling these guys bleeding hearts. On immigration, he's been a study in confusion. One day preaching compassion for dreamers while deploying amnesty the very next. The smart play is for Republicans to show they can solve at least some immigration policies or problems. If Mr. Trump wants to lose the House and risk impeachment, he'll keep giving Democrats a daily picture of children stripped from their parents. And it looks like the White House is going to double down on this immigration crackdown, unless there's some surprise coming out of the meeting that's going on as we speak. Politico's reporting that hardliners like Stephen Miller, they want the president to limit visas, tighten rules on student visas, make it harder for legal immigrants to get permanent visas. We could see a fresh crackdown before the midterms. And if you believe the polls, that could be very damaging for the GOP. New numbers from CBS show that 2/3 of the American public that were asked say splitting families at the border unacceptable. 90% of Democrats feel the same way. But only 39% of Republicans don't like the policy. Sounds like Trump's base is sticking together on this one. Plus, nearly 60% don't support the border wall, while a little under 40% want it. Plus, nearly 80% of the people asked support extending DACA and giving the Dreamers a path to citizenship, and only 15% do not want that. All of those polls show opposition to the president's policies, and even some on the religious right, they're pushing back against separating kids from their families. Franklin Graham, who has stood with this president on just about everything, and the son of the late Reverend Billy Graham, he calls the policy disgraceful and terrible. Those are his words. Again, he has been a reliable, staunch supporter of Donald Trump. Now, more and more Republicans are also speaking up. Here, Ohio Governor John Kasich with some very strong words.
And this problem has existed for a while, but this solution is insane. It's ridiculous. You can't start dividing families, but you'd like to see the administration say the solution to this problem at the border is not to separate families and to create conditions that are intolerable. This is not America, the America that you and I have known throughout our lifetime here.
Now, I also want to fill you in on how Republicans in our area, as I said, it's the midterm, so every congressman is up for re-election in November. This is how they're following on this issue. Long Island Congressman Peter King and Lee Zeldin, they're also against the policy. King said, we have to find a better way. Zeldin said, it's simply not a good policy. You go up into the Hudson Valley, Republican John Faso facing a very tough re-election campaign in a swing district. He is also one to be closely watched. He released a statement today saying the policy is wrong and it needs to be addressed immediately. Across the river in Jersey, Star Ledger editorial board calling out the GOP congressional delegation, quote, nearly all, with the exception of Rodney Frelinghuysen, who hasn't commented, have said they're against these family separations and called for a legislative compromise. But why should Trump use kids as a negotiating tool? Why not demand that he immediately end this heartless practice? But the hard right, at least on Fox, they're sticking with the president. Listen to Laura Ingraham from just last night.
So since more illegal immigrants are rushing the border, more kids are being separated from their parents and temporarily housed in what are essentially summer camps, or as the San Diego Union Tribune described them today, as looking like basically boarding schools.
Don't know too many boarding school with cages other than maybe a juvenile detention facility. Let's bring in our panel right now. Charlie King, New York co-chairman of the Mercury Public Affairs, and he also is a senior campaign advisor to Andrew Cuomo's re-election campaign. Richard St. Paul, Republican strategist and former vice chair for the National Black Republican Association, and Andrew Whitman, still with us. All right, Richard.
How do I know it's going to be?
I'm sorry, my friend. He puts you in the in the chamber on this one, but Do you think it's summer camp? Do you think it's boarding school putting kids in cages? And do you think the Republican Party is going to stand with this president much longer on this one, given the story goes from bad to worse every news cycle?
Well, look, this is certainly not an ideal outcome. There's two perspectives. One, the legal and then the political side. On the legal side, the position is very solid. If you're crossing the border illegally, that is a crime. You're being prosecuted for that crime. You cannot prosecute the parents and have the children go into a criminal justice system.
Previous administrations had done civil penalties against these families that were moving in. It's the change from civil to criminal that's causing these separation at the border.
It's not a change. It is still, it's criminal.
It's absolutely a change.
It was
It's
a
not
choice.
It's the change. There's no change in it being criminal. It is criminal to come into this country.
Being addressed as being criminal. It's the equivalent between a cop deciding to give somebody a warning or give them a ticket.
And we'll argue that later on when we talk about marijuana. However, it's a crime, period. Nobody can argue that it's not a crime. And there is discretion
but Richard,
to
just one thing.
determine
So we
whether
agree
or
on the
not
facts.
you can
The
prosecute,
choice
should
on how
prosecute this
to
person.
prosecute this has changed in the last month, okay? Both the Bush administration, the Obama administration, they did not choose to separate, certainly on this broader plan here, families,
They did
mother
not-
and child.
They did not
This
do it
is
so
new,
broadly. It did happen under the Obama administration.
not to
and
the remote degree that we're
I
seeing
just
now.
said that.
Okay.
However, Obama in 2014 faced a lot of criticism for basically detaining families in large detention centers. My point is that this is not a very easy solution, and that the best solution to keeping families together is to come up with comprehensive immigration.
Is the right way to do that to basically blackmail Congress that if you don't give me my funding, I'm going to keep your kids, I'm going to keep these kids in cages?
I would never say that that was the good or the best way to do that is to hold families and children hostage.
Would you agree that's what they're doing?
No, I wouldn't agree that that's what they're doing. I have no information to say that that's what the goal is. I mean, unless the president or his representative said it themselves, I have no information
Charlie,
that that's what they're trying to do.
I know we can all, well, I think we can all agree on how morally offensive this is, but this is political malpractice of the first order. I mean, you're in an election year. You consciously telegraph you're going to do this if you don't get what you want. You do it. You try and blame folks that everybody says it was your choice, and then you stay with it without acknowledging any error, ensuring that this gets one more day after another of news cycle coverage. I mean, why not just, point the political gun to your head and just fire? I mean, this is crazy.
Well, first of all, I want to give Richard his props for the courage to come out on such a bad day to defend something that's absolutely you can't defend. This is horrendous. But you're right, it is political malpractice. I think you have people like Stephen Miller who they don't care. It's a jihad going towards the core of the base that don't care about anything. And it's splitting the party apart. You're going to see Richard all night trying to defend things that are impossible to defend. He's going to try to do the best he can. By the way, let's assume that it is a crime. It's a misdemeanor. So is public intoxication. You do not separate parents from children on that. And more Republicans need to stand up, like I know you would if you were not on message, to say that this is one of the most offensive things you've seen ever. And that's the problem. The problem is that what Trump is doing is he's dividing the party against itself. He thinks it makes good sense, but at the end of the day, it's the exact opposite.
White House thinks this is a political winner for them. I mean, you talked before, you showed the Politico piece about with Stephen Miller in the background talking about how they're going to ramp up even more immigration enforcement between now and the midterms. They think as long as immigration is in the news, whether it makes them look good or makes them look bad, it's sort of like bad press for Trump. As long as you're saying Trump, it's good for him.
I've heard what you said, and I think they do believe it. But the vast majority of electeds that are up for re-election are running away from this policy. They're usually afraid of doing anything to run away from Trump. They see what happened to Mark Sanford. They see what happened to other Republicans who pushed back before the primaries. They're pushing back en masse right now. And even the stalwarts of the Christian conservatives and the rest, they're calling this immoral. People aren't standing with the president on this one, which is usually their first concern.
Right. Yeah. The challenge is it's basically, I think, for the Republicans, it's American values against Republican American values that are just, I mean, the core idea of separating parents from young children are reprehensible across the board, even though immigration plays well to the base. And that's the thing where Trump is tone deaf on. So while trying to run up the immigration issue, which is a winner, Stephen Miller, in my view, is completely tone deaf, that you can't use any tool like children being separated to be able to keep that in the news.
You know, there was a Times magazine came out with a Quinnipiac poll recently that said 55% of Republicans support the president's position on prosecuting parents who cross the borders and separating families. That's solid ground for Republicans to say that the majority of Republican voters support this position, and that's also should be a catalyst to Democrats to work with Republicans to come up with comprehensive immigration reform.
But you give
the president
You said how Republican voters look at it. On the other side of this issue,
Republican legislators.
Okay.
Republican voters support it, which means Republican legislators are pretty much safe on this issue unless they happen
but
to be in a
Richard,
swing
we're treating
swing
this
district.
as an academic equation. You hear the audio of kids sobbing. You see the pictures of kids in cages. And we don't, by the way, I'm telling you the news story now, this is not politics. There's going to be stories where kids cannot be reconnected with their parents. There's going to be stories where bad things are going to happen to more than 2,000 kids. Some kid's going to be abused, God forbid, or something bad is going to happen to a child. And then this president, who as much as he wants to blame everyone else, he created this, he owns it. That becomes another storyline. And to me, this story doesn't go away because they're not going to give him his wall funding, right? We both know that, okay?
But why not? I mean,
Why not?
Senator Manchin, who's in a
I
tight...
just showed you the polls. The American public doesn't want to give him his wall. He also
no.
promised everybody Mexico's paying for it.
Senator Manchin
why would
has
Democrats
changed his mind.
Why would Democrats negotiate for wall funding with it pointed to their heads, but it's really gun pointed to the heads of these kids?
Senator Manchin, who's in a tight re-election campaign in West Virginia, is supporting the president's $1 billion it is as a basis for the 26
But here's
billion.
the problem.
There are
No,
other
no,
senators
but
that I
here's the
think
problem, Richard. The problem
who are
is today
Democrat who
we
will
learned
change their
something.
mind.
The president, it turns out, is livid because he thought he was getting his $25 billion all at once. When everyone explained to him how funding works here and how it's appropriated, he said, no good. Either I get all my $25 billion or nothing. So even those, Nick Mulvaney, his budget director, is the one who laid it out and explained it to him, he still doesn't understand how the process works, and he thinks he's just getting it all at once. Richard, I'm not putting you in this spot here to defend the indefensible here, but he can't negotiate because he doesn't know what he wants, because it changes every day. And the problem is, in Living Technicolor, we have Laura Bush comparing this to the internment of the Japanese. I mean, I have other people on the right saying the Nazi analogy is not an unfair one. I mean, you can't get worse than this.
Not an ideal scenario at all. The hope that I see is that in the next week or two that we have some immigration a package put together,
Again,
which
if
Congress
you
is
have
working
people
on right
negotiating
now.
in good faith, I think that would be possible. Unfortunately, the man who put this in motion, I don't think has that capacity, and that's being polite. Coming up next, New York City, they'll stop arresting people who are smoking pot in public. You heard me right. The state could be one step closer to legalizing it. We'll look at what's next and also debate the issue.